Hello, hello. Hi, everyone. Hello, everyone. Oh, I see some people. Oh, it's cute puppy. I'm a big dog person myself, so I'm like, oh, that's it's a cute one. But welcome, everyone. I hope everyone enjoyed the last session here, and I am so excited to listen to this next presentation. Dean Schuster. Uh, am I saying it right? Schuster?
Schuster.
Schuster.
Yeah.
Oh, good. See, I always ask. For
no
those
worries.
For those of you who don't know me, my name is, or have never heard me or just seen me, and who is that guy with the miniVAte sign with hair behind him? You can tell Brad I said that. My name is Gil Pisano. I'm on the board of Agile Richmond, and with me here also helping, also co-host is Julie Bright from Agile Charlottesville. We're both really excited to be here and to introduce Dean Schuster, who actually, just so you have control, Dean, I am making you co-host as well, so you have some power there. Okay, but for those of you who've never had the pleasure of hearing Dean, he is the founder and partner of Truematter, a user experience strategy firm. Dean has been advocating for user-centered digital products since the advent of the commercial web. He also oversees Truematter's UX practice, leading strategic engagements for innovative regional organizations as well as the Fortune 100. So with that said, understanding the mysterious behavior of complex digital product users.
All right.
All right, Dean, take it away.
Ready to go. Okay, so what I'm going to do first, if everyone can hear me okay, I assume, I'm going to go ahead and share my screen and we'll get kicking here. All right. Success. And as soon as I hit this, you should see a big old crazy miniVAte and the sky. Okay, awesome. So let me get myself situated. Okay, great. So here we are. miniVAte, thanks so much for spending time with me today. I know like this is like the penultimate deal in miniVAte. It's getting to that part of Friday where you're like, man, here at Truematter, it's almost tea time. But some people choose to bring more than tea to tea time on Friday. Okay, so we're talking about the mysterious behavior of complex digital product users. Again, my name is Dean, and you can find me Experience Dean, Twitter, Instagram, all that good stuff. Love talking about this stuff tremendously, so we can catch up later if you want to, as well as today. Once again, I'm the partner in Truematter. We're that UX consultancy, and we actually specialize in complex digital products. So that means we're working with development teams all day, every day on highly functional stuff. And all of those development teams are doing agile development in some way, shape, or form. So we're really close to all of that. We just have the view of an outside sort of force looking in to different agile teams. So we can talk through that even after we're done talking about users, if you want that UX perspective. But today we're going to talk a little bit about use and users. Everything we make, every functional thing we make, every complex thing we make has users. We all know this, but everything we do has to connect to them perfectly well. And it's not always easy. It's not always evident. I mean, we throw the word user around a lot. It just is a matter of course, even in documentation and things like that. But what does it mean to get right up close with people who are really using the stuff we make? So let me tell you the story of a team that once created this complex digital product, lovely thing, and they did their very best to make it super easy to use. And they followed what they thought were modern usability rules. And that means they made it open and spacious and easy to scan and intuitive, whatever that means. They did their best to make it this wonderful thing. And they're very proud of it. So when they bring it to their users, they show up with confidence. I've done something great. I've done something right. But there's just one problem. And that is, whoops, let's go back a little bit. Went a little bit too fast there. The users hated it. They absolutely hated this thing that was delivered. So the question is, what did they hate? And understanding what people hated about interfaces like this led us down a path years ago to really understanding an entirely different class of user. And it's a user that is associated with the complex internal systems that we make all the time. And I'm sure y'all are making all the time. So first, let me say what the users did hate. They hated literally everything about it. They hated how big everything was. They hated that they had to scroll. They hated the number of clicks they had to make. They hated moving into separate screens for separate steps. They hated not being able to see everything they needed right away. They literally rejected it on every front. So my first thought is, what's going on? This design was made with a lot of tender, loving care. So what happened? The users obviously didn't connect with it. And it's a common theme in the design community, right? Now we can make fun of designers for a minute, right? Because they think that certain ways you look at things affect whether they're usable or not, right? And as developers, we know that this isn't true, but a lot of design teams believe that Apple and Google, because they're Spartan and open and clean, they get it right. And that your stuff's gross, ugly, and sick, and crowded, and awful, and stinks in every way. But they've learned the wrong lesson. And that's what we're going to go through a little bit today. So we're going to learn why this interface is wrong for the type of users that are having to deal with it all day, every day. And in order to get an understanding of why this thing's wrong, I'm going to walk a little bit through different user types, and hopefully you have fun with this and learn a little bit about how people approach things. Some of it will seem obvious, but some not. So I've created something called the 4 UI quadrants. This is sort of like my own thing. It's not official. It's my way of understanding use. And I'm suggesting that user interfaces can be divided well into 4 basic types. Oops. Let's get back here. Some products are used super, super rarely, right? We might only encounter them in very, very specific situations, right? And some we use a lot. As we move up from white to red, frequency of use rises in our little chart here. Some people, of course, are more experienced in using digital products than others, right? So we've got novice users over here on the left. Now, we kind of know a lot about novice users because they have very common qualities. They don't readily connect with digital products. Maybe they're new to a product or they're new to technology. They have super basic mental models. They know that I can go back and I can scroll, and if I click something, I'll go somewhere. They know very, very little. They're not confident. They're slow. They're methodical. They could even be what I'd call technophobic, right? And they know this about themselves. Fortunately, a lot of novice users are pretty self-aware. They know they're like this. Now, over on the right, we got the power users. That's us, okay? If you're on this call, if you're watching this talk, you're a power user, okay? You have all of the qualities of the person who knows how to use digital products rather intuitively. You pick up complex UI patterns, you're comfortable with complex interactions, super confident, impatient, in a rush. You and I are likely to make errors because we rush. We dismiss complexity. I got this. Reading directions, yeah, okay, whatever. Asking for help, please. And it's not going to happen, right? That's your power user, typical power user. So now we got sort of 4 quadrants with frequency of use going up and down and tech savvy going left to right. And we could sort of map different types of users. And we're actually going to focus on 2 extremes. What products are generally used rarely by novices, and then what products are used constantly, all the time, by power users. All right. Now, this is going to make a huge contrast in how products are made, and it helps us understand what's happening on the complex side. So we can plot digital products. Let's look at the novices really quick first, right? So This is kind of easy because they enjoy popular consumer products, right? Everyone knows a novice user. These are people using sites and apps that are ubiquitous in our culture, right? They might use things all the time, like texting. Everyone texts. Or maybe they're going to use a banking app relatively frequently. Very common. Less common, maybe they're doing the taxes. We probably just finished up our taxes last week. Well, if you're me, I finished them last day, and used tax software. Or maybe booked a vacation, which hopefully very soon everyone will be getting to do. And maybe a medical survey. Let's think about those things for a novice user. This is why a site like Airbnb, very typical, prototypical site that has to accommodate novices, is so well done in its simplicity. It's got to be approachable for everyone. It's built on extremely familiar interactions. It's very survival as a product and a site. It rests on how easy to use it is, because people don't have to use this service. They could use something else. Notice it's clean, it's open, it's simple. All the things that designers or UX people tend to want out of digital products all the time. Right? And usually are focusing on one thing at a time, one sort of interaction at a time. Here, we're just here to look at pictures. That's it. That's all we have to do. Very hard to screw that up. And on mobile, you see that even more. You're seeing literally just a couple of things at a time. You would expect a novice user, maybe they'll have a little trouble, but they'll pick this up. TurboTax, if you use TurboTax, which I do, same thing, same principle. And it's really amazing because tax software is really covering super complex functionality, obviously, but they have to make it presentable in an extremely simple way for people who maybe this is their first time doing taxes online. Maybe they're super novices. They really have to capture everybody. And that's not easy to do. So that's why they're designing for that, lowest common denominator of use. Everything has to be super easy to understand. It just has to be. And when we see this on mobile, you see similar types of situations that you saw with Airbnb. One thing at a time. Take one step and do it. Make one choice and go. Go back if you messed up. Very basic. People in general can get through it. Now, a medical survey, this is like the nth degree of that. So you imagine, you're at an orthopedic surgeon, or you're doing some rehab or whatever, and they hand you a tablet, and it's just going to ask you about the pain you're feeling, and they're taking a baseline. And this has to be super easy for anyone, young, old, super tech savvy, super novice, maybe people with low vision, maybe people whose hands are affected by arthritis, who have difficulty with motor skills. That's why the more novice you get with an interface, the bigger things get, and the more easy, large, and spacious they must be. They just have to be. You have to allow anyone to get this and really have a hard time making a mistake. So text is large, options are limited. It's as user-proof as we can get. So there's qualities that these novice users have, right? And they really tend to be kind of anxious about their whole experience. Is this going to be easy? Am I going to need help? What do I do? Please, where do I go? And we have to answer all those questions in the interface really easily. And that's why design for these people looks the way it does. It has to be that way. And so these folks really just want to be happy and satisfied that they did it right. If they feel like their experience was smooth, they'll feel wonderful about it. And that's important for them. That's why these interfaces are simple and direct, and they only do one thing at a time. So let's think about power users now. But before we dive into power users, who we all know very well, we are power users. Let's focus on a certain type of power user. And this is where things twist a little bit, because I want to focus on something I call, and is called in our UX industry, the expert user. This is a power user with super heavy experience in a certain app or tool. They're very likely to have been trained on this app or tool. It's probably some crazy internal app or industry specific app. In fact, these folks, as a rule, carry with them significant industry domain knowledge as they're coming toward an interface. You probably are either on a team making something like this or have been in the past. Now, these folks, these expert users, is who I want to talk about. And these folks are different because they have highly tailored tools. They're doing crazy multivariate data analysis. They're doing who knows what task with this system today or tomorrow or an hour from now. They're not just dealing with one path to get something done. They have dozens of paths that they might or might not take. So they're doing really complex stuff. Now, a lot of those complex interfaces have a lot in common. Maybe they have big data grids, tons of modals, lots of options, tons of stuff to do, to look up, to compare, all sorts of things like that. Very common. You're going to deal with a ton of grids and things of this nature. That's complex UI. But when we bring in the expert users, that's when things get different because they care about very different things, even more so than the typical power user. Think of the power user on steroids almost as the expert user. This thing's got to be fast. It can't be in my way. It's got to flow directly within the stuff I do every day. I've got to see everything. I can't slow down. I can't go left or right. I've got to go right to something. Just talk to me like I need to be talked to. Don't patronize me. I know what I'm doing. This is the expert user. They want to be efficient. More than anything, they value this. They value efficiency. Anything that gets in the way of productivity is radically hated. And I mean radically, angrily hated. So the stuff that we make for them has to fit what they do. So it's going to be complex. It's going to use specific language that they use. We hear in UX circles all the time, just be careful with your language. Don't use jargon. You use jargon for expert users. They want you to. Things are compact and dense, whereas you typically hear, give it space, let it breathe, so it's easy to use. Expert users, again, power users times 2, right? They want lots of density. They want specific open paths, lots to do. And they're probably a narrow audience. I mean, we've done interfaces for complex users where we knew by name every single user of the system. And sometimes there's as few as 20 to 30 users of the system. Sometimes as many as thousands. Okay, so the solutions we have for these folks tend to be counterintuitive, especially if you're a usability person or a designer who constantly, you'll notice this about them, they will sort of list over to, it's got to be clean and beautiful. It's got to be easy and approachable. Nothing's wrong with those things. Those are very good. Those are wise things. But for these users, they're wrong. So things are a little different. Now, the problem is bigger though, because complex interfaces have traditionally been designed by like development teams, by us. But I mean by development teams who have a lot of good. They understand the need for density and complexity. You usually don't have to tell a development team that their users want this stuff. They're like, yeah, of course they do, right? Or they constantly say, can we put something in this area where there's white space? But the real problem is that these teams, development teams, are radically unschooled in general UX principles, which will help them turn their instincts into something good. We see this all the time. Development teams are either not attempting to do a strong user experience design, they'll work straight out of the box quite a lot, or they'll throw every possible design trick at something to beautify it, and in so make it somehow usable, as if you could just make something pretty and then make it work, as if we build cars by completely engineering them and then making them pretty. I mean, it's not how it's done in the real world, certainly shouldn't be that way with software. So development teams who are working without these skill sets tend to make stuff that's hard to use, that's unimpressive, that's difficult. And we still see this all the time. Every day we see this in my travels. So you might have crowded interfaces from back in the day, right? This is old stuff and everything is dense and crowded, and we really haven't changed a ton from that old day. This is not a terribly old interface I'm showing. It's sort of out of the box. It's got a lot of bad decisions associated with it, completely dev-led. So while we understand the need to have a dense grid and show lots of stuff, we're doing so usually in a really just awful way. And that's why this sort of work is susceptible to people saying, you need to design this. You need to make this a great user experience. And then we go down the road of making different mistakes. So we got two problems, right? We got modern design approaches, what I'm calling modern, which is UX and dev working together with design and content. Those approaches can be ill-suited for this because we try to do something that's not right for the complex user. And then if we're just focusing on a traditional development-led approach, again, whether agile, waterfall, it doesn't matter. It's about having the right skill sets or comportment toward the user. Those are problems too. So the question is, what do we do beyond the basic obvious, which is integrate teams better with these skill sets and actually spend time with users? That's the real answer, and we're going to return to that. But what else can we do to make a data-dense interface easy to use? Because this screen, it looks kind of like there's a lot going on. You can probably see that there's dense data grids and all this stuff. I can assure you that this screen is in fact super easy to use because it's been tested rigorously and extensively. And it's loved by the people who use it because it's been tested rigorously and extensively with the real users. Designers may argue one way or the other whether it is truly a wonderful piece of UX design. I can tell you it is because it works completely. It's not just functional, it actually is great interaction. So what are the principles behind getting us there? And I'm going to spend a little bit of time talking about those principles in general, just scratching the surface of those principles. And we're going to return to how teams in general can sort of align themselves this way to get there better. Okay, so let's dive in a little bit. So there's some things you could do for expert users in complex UI. But the main thing we have to fight all the time when we're making a complex interface is what I call, we're having space wars because we're always arguing about every last little bit of white space in an interface. These are worthy arguments to have, especially when we're talking about efficiency and productivity. Key example is density. Spacious interfaces are in fact perceived as easier to use before you actually touch or use them by most people. And they tend to look better and more organized and wonderful. But experts love density, right? And this changes the rules for complex UI. What works broadly doesn't work. Honestly, complex user of a complex interface, an expert user, they'll look at this and you know what they'll say to us? Can you get more stars on this? That's what we want. And that's metaphorically true and no joke. So this old interface you're starting to see that we showed earlier, it addressed almost zero of these core needs of a complex interface and an expert user. No wonder, they basically laughed it out of Dodge. So we're going to talk a little bit then about using space more correctly. So how do we fight these space wars or win these arguments? The first thing we want to do is something I call minimizing the shell. Now, the shell is the basic aspects of your interface. Some people call it the Chrome. This is where you're putting, your rough navigation, your context. We're going to minimize this. We want this as small as humanly possible in complex UI. I mean, really small. Honestly, I just made this left bar smaller. Wouldn't it be wonderful if it were gone? Okay, this is basically how we have to think for complex UI. Now, conversely, we have to maximize the interaction area. This is the entire place where we're actually doing work. This green area, this is where everything happens. So we need most of our space active here. There's no such thing as too much horizontal real estate because we're going to have to deal with grids. And there's really no such thing as too much vertical real estate because we don't want people to have to spend time finding a thing. It's a tough thing to do, especially if the thing you're making is not called Excel. Now you could have open grids, right? And you can see how you can design lovely grids. This is actually just a straight up Kendo UI grid styled differently. But what we want to do always when we're conserving space is always see how much more compact we can make it while still retaining maximum scannability and usability. We're going to get to that in a minute, but you can see how we've already made this quite compact and retain some easy at a glance power. Of course, we're going to be careful of scrolling. It's funny how a lot of designers and UX people, they just roll their eyes whenever someone says, I don't want to scroll or I don't want too many clicks, because they hear it so often. It's like a droning chorus to them. But when we get into complex UI, it's mega true. And sometimes those folks have to be jarred back to reality. But if you have an interface like this, which has an important data grid to it, you are wasting a huge amount of vertical space above that grid. I mean, a ton of it. Now, in this case, users needed these things, but for the most part, with complex UI, that is utterly wasted. And you want to radically compress this and get more and more and more of that grid available. It's almost always about grid visibility. And that data in a grid has to be super highly scannable. If you look at this simple presentation, there's some simple rules happening here, even though it's super complex. We've separated things simply. We've labeled them clearly. We have within each area very clear delineation of what is a header row or what is a primary column or how colors work in a grid. You should be able to look at anything, no matter how complex, and at a glance know what's happening. Then you know that's rock and roll. Then you know you're really getting it right. And we'll talk more about words as well, but you have to trust me that all the words have to be 100% correct, and they are here. We need to use icons and graphics sparingly. This is like poison to the typical designer or even UX person, but it's very true. Strong, complex UIs, they don't need that much help if you make them right in the first place. So we can use icons sparingly. Even here, there were some icons early on, just calendar, date pickers that ultimately we altered, and we tested without and with, and there was very little difference. So we wanted to move on without. And of course, you want to avoid basically anything I describe as, and this is an official term, clunky. All right, so if we look at a typical, prototypical clunky dashboard, this design does nearly everything wrong in terms of complex UI, nearly everything, right up to and including how it names things or how it uses white space or where it puts things. It's using space very poorly. And if this were put in front of a complex UI expert user, they would hate it. Another thing we want to do is hide complexity. In this interface, very simple interface actually, right? We see a few things we can do. We could hide the left nav bar. We're doing accordions, we can collapse them. We have simple tabs. A lot of that's going on here. And the trick to hiding complexity is that you only hide complexity that you actually never need at a glance. You only hide information you need seldom and in specific situations. If you don't use something much or only during specific actions, hide it all the time. So it might be something simple as a nav bar, which you can collapse. In this case, this nav bar, it had options that were used so rarely that collapsing it was fine. It was actually rare to open it and try. You hide complexity in forms all the time, right? And this is an important way of hiding complexity. We don't show everything in a form unless we have to. So we want to make sure that we're only giving a user something when they need to get it. It'll help efficiency as well, of course. Happy Fox does this kind of well. It's a ticket tracking software, and it hides complexities fairly well. Its heart is in the right place. It's not perfect, but as you can see, it would hide details of a ticket. Not too bad, not too bad. There's a lot they could do better, but they're trying. They're trying their best. And they hide other types of complexity and interactions as well. There's a lot on data grids. I'll linger on this screen for a minute, and I'm sure I'll make my slides available to everyone. There's just a lot of stuff on grids. We could have just talked only about grids. That'll benefit you to know or look at or become familiar with. And so Andrew did a really nice thing here on Medium that I recommend you look at for a lot more. Now, another thing we need to do with interfaces is to preserve key details. We don't want to disappear things that have to be seen. And this is a common problem with interfaces. So let's take a simple thing like a sticky top row, right? Simply by making a very common thing, people do this all the time, a sticky row, you know at a glance what your column is that you're looking at. And when you have to look at grids all day long, and we've seen complex UI users with multiple windows of massive grids, one grid's Excel, just outright Excel, and then two other screens of dense data, looking at it all day, they've got to be able to at a glance see it, which means they've got to see every important label quickly and easily. And that's one way you do it. And again, if you look at that grid example, you get a lot more ways to do that. Of course, being readable on a screen is super important. So we actually spend a long time thinking about type for complex UI, because people typically they're using this stuff all day long. And that is a huge part of how these interfaces need to be designed. So we need to use type that's made specifically for the screen. It's sans serif. That means it doesn't have all those funky Times New Roman little bits on it. It's more straight. You want to be careful about numeric display, nothing fancy. You got to see it super small. You got to see it mobile. And where possible, you should be using, particularly on mobile devices, their defaults. So if you look at examples from good to bad, down at the bottom, you've got a monospace font, which is kind of nice for numbers, but just horrible for letters. And as you go up from the bottom, it's getting better and better and better. And so as you get up to the top, you've got a Roboto is condensed, and it's clear, and it's made for the screen, and it's really good for data dense displays. And that's important for usability and readability. So if you look at this, condensed grid, there's problems with this grid, as you can probably see, but type isn't one of them. This grid is a little too spacious for the typical complex user. It actually is correct for the users of this system. It was tested this way. But for the most part, the complex UI expert user is going to need to see more. And that means tighter displays. And the tighter you get, the more these typefaces become important. So imagine you got to look at this stuff all day, right? I mean, and this is just one little piece. What if this filled your screen or filled multiple screens? That's rough. And so spending time on grids and thinking of these principles will make lives easier, the lives of expert users easier. All right, a few more things. I'm going to talk a little bit about color. You have to use it correctly and with purpose. So you can use color effectively by simply using it only a little. Showing restraint is hard to do with color because color is super powerful. A little bit of color goes a very long way, especially in complex UI. And color means something too. You've got to be careful about the colors you use. In this case, you can't, this is a real thing, by the way. And you can't do this because it's haphazard, horrible, doesn't make any sense, uses color badly on a number of fronts, is internationally inappropriate, and also horrific. But you should reserve color for purposeful interaction. So if you think about a very simple screen, really, this isn't even a super complex screen, but notice action buttons, green. Everything else, you have links, hyperlinks, blue. Everything else is completely neutral, except like this sort of teal branded element of a logo that tells you I'm in an admin section, not somewhere else. The more you use color with little bits of power, the more powerful your interface will be, because color conveys meaning, as we all know. And this is true for us, here in America and in the West. These colors mean very specific things. It's not true everywhere, but for us, green, awesome, it's okay, we did it, go. Yellow, pause, wait, what's going on? Red, error, bad, danger, right? We should use these colors for what we already know they mean. Of course, we need to use contrast for proper scanning. This is an alternating row example. It's actually not a very good one because its contrast is poor. But the idea of using the alternating row has to do with scannability. There's a lot of, we could argue about how to do these right all day long, literally, but in principle, they tend to help. Here, the contrast is actually not good enough. So that means you need to be thinking about WCAG standards. You need to be designing to AA standards, coding to AA standards all the time. It's really not an option, not just because, it's just the right thing to do, but because it'll help your interface be better. So here you can do a sample color contrast test with WCAG, right? And see whether something passes or fails, whether text on a certain background. In this case, it passes. In this case, it fails. And when you use these easy to use software programs to test this stuff, you'll know you passed WCAG. You'll know it's going to be good for people with low vision in particular. And there's, of course, all sorts of rules for AA. But the idea is you're going for usability, and you're going for usability for everyone. That means everyone. Now, power users, we're all power users, right? We're keyboard shortcut people, right? We know it's faster, far more efficient than using the mouse. When you get to expert users, they're using keyboard like a ton, sometimes exclusively. So if you're thinking WCAG, particularly AA, you're already designing for excellent keyboard use, which means you're compliant, you're accessible, and you're being super friendly to expert users. So all these things come together, sort of two birds with one stone approach. And of course, I also want to encourage you to be careful in anything you do of cultural context, specifically with color. If you have an international app, you can't just assume that the color red, for instance, means a certain thing, because it doesn't everywhere. So you're going to have to be careful of that. And we can focus then back on this interface. It's doing a lot of things right. It's using color to convey meaning. It's using color in a limited way. It's maximizing the interaction area. It's dense where it has to be, but you can scan it. Things are clearly labeled. We're using jargon, but these are the words that complex users, right? Users of complex UI, they know. If I am an expert user, use my jargon, use acronyms. It's faster for me. We all know this. That's a very different rule from a general stance toward users. And so screens are only correct if you do them, you obey all the rules, and then you user test them. So understanding these folks is something that takes not just getting used to, but it takes continued practice and lots of time spent with them. You spend a lot of time with expert users, all this stuff is like crazy obvious. They will tell you this right away, and you'll change the way you design. But the key is spending time with users. And I mean end users. I don't mean stakeholders. I don't mean opinion leaders. I don't mean customers. I mean end users. Those are literally the people who matter when it comes to use. Of course, understanding these people is important. We all hate change. Expert users radically hate change because they've got muscle memory. They probably have workarounds that are contingent on the current interface, for crying out loud. So they're going to hate change. It's going to be difficult. That's why you got to bring them along with you. That's why they should be participating in prototyping and critiquing those. And they should be, and these interfaces should be tested. See, when I talk to UX teams about this subject, I have to tell them, hey, listen, I haven't changed any rules for strong UX UI. All I've done is apply the existing excellent rules to a specific type of user. If your user is faster, more efficient, pleased, and tracks better with a certain type of interface element, then you must use it, straight up, even if the majority of sites out there might not. And that's sort of the secret for the complex user. I've got a couple of book recommendations before we end. These are really great. Interaction design for complex problem solving in particular. Really good stuff. And if you're a developer who's seeking to understand more how the UX mind sort of attacks interfaces, these are great ways to do it. Really, really good. Now, we do have to lead in this regard. And it's hard for us as developers. I totally get it. How often have I talked to my dev teams and I've said, wouldn't it be great? Wouldn't it be wonderful? Wouldn't it be Shangri-La if the designers, UX people, stakeholders, content writers in our lives would just know a little something about front-end code or how development works or how we go about what we do? Wouldn't things be better? Wouldn't things be easier? Wouldn't we have easier discussions? Wouldn't they stop having stupid ideas? Whatever it is, wouldn't it be better? We all say, yeah, of course, we want that so badly. The opposite is true. As developers, we need to understand the UX mind. We need to understand why they approach things the way they do and why user experience and user testing make digital products better. Because if we do that, we are taking the step toward making all those product conversations better, more amazing. Forget let alone the respect you get in a project team, because so few developers do this. You'll instantly become a better developer or develop better leader, product team leader. Again, to conclude, user testing is our best path forward, bar none. You've got to spend time with end users. If you're not, you're guessing. That's it. Or you're just listening to the guess of a customer, or you're just listening to the guess of a stakeholder. A great book that I strongly recommend is Handbook of Usability Testing. Great reference, wonderful stuff. If you as a developer, develop leader, or product leader read this end to end, it could literally change your professional life. So I strongly recommend that. Other than that, I want to conclude and say you can do this stuff. You can totally make great things. I know this has been quick, sort of rapid fire approach to this, but I hope it sort of whet your appetite for the UX side of the equation. You can talk to me about this anytime you want, by the way. You can find me online, whatever. But we do have a good bit of time to chat right now, and we could talk about this, or if you want, we can actually talk on some agile specific subjects, since you know that I manage UX teams as well, and we have to integrate with agile teams, so we can answer those questions. So I'm going to go ahead and get out of my screen here. Let's see. There we go. And I'm actually going to stop my share. Let's see here. There we go. Okay. Now it's just me. So I really thank you for listening. I'm here for questions, whatever we need.
Yes, thank you, Dean. Thank you, Dean. That was very enlightening for me. I can talk not only for myself, but for others. I mean, does anyone have any questions? For Dean, not for me.
I am actually really interested in how agile teams are trying to integrate user experience and where they feel they're doing well or they're failing. That sort of thing interests me all the time, because we're still very early, in my opinion, in that curve of integrating user experience or content strategy into a fundamentally development-centered process. And it's still in a rocky period. Yay, bootcamp in UX design.
Yeah. I do have one question myself.
Yeah.
Can you give some example in all your experience, you and your team's experiences leading up to this point? Are there any examples of things that really took you off guard? Big surprise
Yeah.
when it comes to what a novice user wants and what a power user wants. Like something like caught you off guard, like what? That epiphany.
Yeah, the very first thing that caught us off guard, that told us we were dealing with something completely different, was words. And it sort of drilled into the UX mind or the content strategy mind the importance of words and microcopy. And this is extremely true. Your digital product will rise or fall on the power of one or two words here and there, the microcopy, the content strategy. And drilled into our minds is the fact that you've got to be exceedingly clear with language. You can be unmistakable and easy. And the things that make language unmistakable and at a glance easy for nearly everyone, including power users, is just not the same thing for expert users. So it shocked us. This is years ago when we were testing a complex app, and all the users were like, they got mad at us because they felt we were patronizing them. Like, why are you talking to me like a kid? Why are you talking to me like I'm someone who doesn't know anything? I've been in this industry for 20 years. Don't change my terms. Don't change my acronyms. Don't change my jargon. What are you doing to me? And we were like, oh. And then after we thought about it for a minute, we said, well, wait a minute. Why did we change those things? If we had just listened to them, it would have been obvious to us that this is the language they use. And so the real rule is to simply use the exact terms, nomenclature, taxonomy, words that your users are using every day. And if you do that, you're fine. And it's just with expert users, you're like, I'm just not used to designing something full of acronyms, but they want it, and they'll aggressively say, look at this. We can get like 3 more columns in here if you adjust, and they meant it. And then when we changed it, we got the columns in, they were like, their problem really is expert users. They're so smart. They tend to say, I can make my own Excel spreadsheet do this. Why can't you? And they kind of try to push you toward Excel, which is the difficult balancing act. Because there's a reason why Excel exists, because it does what Excel does very well. And there's a reason why a browser-based app exists. So we have to figure out how to let them do what they do best. Those are the 2 examples.
Oh, perfect. I know. I see there's something in the chat. Emma, you wrote something. Do UI rules of thumb change radically between breakpoints?
That's a good question. Well, yes and no. First of all, if you are designing for expert users complex systems, chances of you using a full desktop view very strong. We hardly ever respond past the tablet when we're dealing with this mega dense stuff. Usually the thing that these people are using, if they use their phone, becomes something completely different at phone level. I mean, completely. So in that sense, the rules it's so different, it's a different thing. But the rules don't really change in general past breakpoints. You should be able to look at a screen and know instantly what you have to do, and know where to start, know where you can go, know where you've been. These things are important on any screen, any size. And if that changes past breakpoints, you got problems, which is why when we went down to mobile, just wrestling with this problem of navigational complexity was very difficult. And people invented this thing called the hamburger to solve it, and it was a problem, and it's not perfect, and slowly it's becoming a standard, but it is still to this day used completely unevenly. I blame you, Microsoft, and it is still not yet a common thing that everyone knows exactly what it does, but it's trying to solve a huge problem of density of information and navigation. So by and large, we've solved some of those things, but you know, now we're on even smaller interfaces, you know, and they do different things. I hope that helps. 5-minute warning.
Yeah. Oh, that was 2 minutes ago.
Oh God, 3 minutes.
Oh no, well, I think we have time for one more question.
Sure.
If anybody else has a question or comment on what Dean shared, then and Dean, you said that this is going to be, you were going to allow people to have a copy.
Yeah,
PDF
absolutely.
copy?
I'll get a PDF. It'll include my notes. So I'll make sure I get that to the conference organizers. And if you like that, that'll work out great.
Okay. I also just, before I forget, I have a website here there's a retrospective for afterwards about this session or anything in the conference.
That's where you give me like 5 stars or something. That's what that is.
Yeah, there you go.
I hope you all have a good last session. Enjoy your Friday. I'm really thankful to people who put on conferences like this. This is great. The stuff people have been doing, the work that goes into conferences like this is astonishing. And I think our whole industry has risen up in this past year and delivered some amazing stuff for people. So I thank you just for doing this.
Thank you. Yeah. And in this industry, we're just scratching the surface. There's a lot more to come from all of us here, everybody here. Yes.
Awesome. Well, thank you all. I appreciate it. I hope you have a good next session, and it's been real. Contact me online if you want to chat more.
Okay, great. Thank you, Dean, and thank you, everyone. We'll share some music over here in a moment. Get it.